Hello, good afternoon. We are just waiting for a couple of more people to join, and then we are going to start. All right, I'll just give everybody a couple more minutes to join, and we're going to start in just a couple of minutes. In the meantime, if you can please share how much of the LSAT studies have you done in the chat box, I would appreciate it. What brings you here today? Have you already done your exam or you're just starting? Actually, let me see if I could start the poll right now. If you can please answer this question, I would appreciate it. You see a question right now on the screen in front of you. If you can please answer this question, and we're going to start in just a minute. Okay, so please choose an answer. You should see a question on the screen right now in front of you. If you could please, I'm just going to wait for you to choose an answer, and then we can start. As soon as you're able to choose an answer, I'm going to close the poll, and we're going to start in just a moment. Hey, let me know if you have any trouble choosing an answer right now. I'm just still waiting for one more person to provide an answer here to this poll, and then I'm going to close this, and we're going to start right away. Okay, and while we're doing this, so what I would like to do is thanks for joining us again this evening. You see a question here in front of you. If you can please choose an answer, that would be great. I'm just waiting for you to choose that answer. And also, while we're just about everybody's joining right now, I would also like to ask you to share in the chat box, what are you hoping to get out of this session? This is going to be a workshop about the LSAT. We'll talk a little bit about the application process as well to law school. So if you could please share in the chat box, what are you hoping to get out of this? What brings you here today? What is the biggest takeaway that if you achieve that, if you get answers to that question, then you will feel like this was a time well spent this evening. If you can share that question in the chat box, I would appreciate it. And then we're going to start in just a second. I want to make sure that when you come here, you really can take something that's really valuable to you. So if I know what you would like to take away, then that's going to really help me direct our discussion as well. I do have a few things to share with you. We're going to do a few questions together, but I would really like to know what you would like to get out of this. So while you're doing this, let me introduce myself. My name is Sergey. I'm an instructor with Admit Master. And I've been teaching the LSAT and the GMAT for quite a while right now, as well as some of the other tests. And the session today is really all about the LSAT, and it's about setting yourself up for success from the start. Now, many of you here said that you are just starting. So a lot of the information here that you will hear is going to be something that perhaps that is very new to you. We will address, of course, the LSAT-Flex, which is the online exam that you're going to be taking if you were to take the exam, let's say in June. As you've probably heard, the June exam, the in-person exam has been canceled. So is the March and the April exam. We are going to address this in a moment. Again, I want to start with giving you a really nice warm welcome from where you are. I am located in Toronto, and that's why you see the nice backdrop at the back. And I wish actually I was in a place that's a little warmer, but it's all right. The summer is almost here. We'll get here. And now I know some of you have already been studying for a little bit, and some of you are just starting. Regardless of where you are, I'm hoping that you could learn a few things from this seminar, and we're going to do this by doing a few exercises as we go along. The first exercise I'd like to do is a logical reasoning question. So I wanted to show you this question and ask you to don't put the answer yet in a chat box, because I'd like to give everybody a chance to think about this question. So I'll give you about 30 seconds to think about this question, then we'll have a discussion about it. All right, so this question, it is from one of the former tests, and this question deals with the subject of ethics. Essentially, it's an argument that was made by ethicist who is trying to present a certain opinion, an opinion structured a certain specific way. When you're looking at this argument for the first time, you might get a little lost. And if you could share maybe how many times you've read this argument, I would be curious to hear that. And I can't really ask you for what the answer is because I haven't shown you yet the answer choices. So what I'd like to do right now is, you've seen this passage in front of you for long enough. So I would like to show you the answer choices, and I'd like to ask you, what do you think is the right answer? So here are the answer choices, and I'll ask you to share what you think is the answer. You should see that box in front of you that's asking you to share the answer. So if you could please choose what you think is the right answer, that would be great, and we can have a discussion. Now, if you don't know what the answer is, just make a best guess. This is an anonymous poll, so nobody's going to judge. Just please choose whatever you think looks the best to you. All right. Well, thanks for sharing this. So we have 3 people voted. 2 people are probably still trying to decide what the answer is. So that is okay. Don't be shy. You could absolutely choose an answer. Again, this is an anonymous poll, so we wouldn't know who's answered what. But let me actually share with you the results from the 3 people that did participate. By a unanimous vote, the answer is C to this question. So what I would like to do is go over the strategy for this question with you. So let's take a look at this question again. Now, this is a question that is, again, an argument. And the question specifically was asking us that there's a certain statement in the middle of this argument that plays a certain role in the ethicist argument. So the question is, what role does it play? in this argument. Now, if you want to understand what role does the question play, that is essentially what's called a role question. Right? You would notice there, please, which of the following roles. So that's a role question. Now, the role question doesn't ask you what this person is thinking, doesn't ask you anything about ethics. It's asking you about the role of a statement. And for that, we need to understand how the statements in this argument are related to each other. So let's now take a look at the structure of this argument. You were probably focusing a lot on trying to understand the content. And you probably also understood that there is some sort of a faulty claim that is in this argument. However, notice that the argument here is the argument by one person. So it's just one person arguing. And when we're talking about the claim of that person, the claim was actually right at the very beginning of this argument, when this person was saying it would be a mistake to say something. So somebody made a mistake. And we, as an ethicist, are trying to explain why this person made a mistake. So after making this claim, we're trying to explain our line of reasoning. Now, again, in order for us to understand this, we need to understand the relationship between the statements. There's three statements here. The first statement is the claim of an argument. It would be a mistake to say something. And then the second and the third statement are explanations to this claim. The second statement specifically is the statement about which the question was asked. Notice how, again, the question was about that assertion that's right in the middle. Now, notice that keywords that connect these statements together. The keyword that connects the second statement to the first is for although this is true. So essentially the author is telling us that there is some part of the reasoning of these people that he or she agrees with. Nevertheless, the entire argument was faulty by these people, and that's why we would disagree with them. Now again, notice how the question was about that part in the middle. It's about that assertion. Now the author does think that this specific statement is true. He specifically said that, but although this is true, and the question is about this part of the argument, it's not about the entire argument. It's about this specific part of the argument. That's why if we go back to the answer choices, most of you have chosen C. Certainly 3 people out of 6 here chosen C. And C says that that part is a faulty claim. Well, the whole argument deals with a faulty claim, but that part specifically was not faulty. The author said that it is true. Therefore, we can reject C as an incorrect answer. Because remember, he said, although this is true. Now, if we look at D, let's just keep going down from C. D says, it is according to the argument a commonly held opinion that is nevertheless false. Again, that part in the middle is false. No, we said it's true, so D is also out. E, it reports an observation that the argument claims is false. Again, the argument didn't claim the part in the middle is false. So that is also out. Now we're down to 2 answer choices only. The right answer should describe that part in the middle correctly. Now the 2 answer choices left, of the 2 answer choices, we just need to look at one. If that one is correct, then we are done. And if that one is incorrect, we're also done, because that means the other one is correct. So for the sake of time, I'd like to look at the answer choice that's shorter, and that is answer choice A. It says, it is a claim for which the argument attempts to provide justification. Now, there was definitely a claim in the argument, but the question wasn't asking us about that claim. The question was asking us about that assertion in the middle. The claim was before it. Therefore, A is not the right answer. B is the right answer. And we don't even need to read it because that's the only one that's left. So notice how, even though we've done this question, we've done all the analysis, we've found the right answer, we have not really understood what was that ethical dilemma that that person was trying to face. What we did understand is just enough for us to find the right answer. We understood the structure of the argument, and that is really what the LSAT is all about. It's about the structure. So here's what we're gonna do today. We start with some warm welcomes, and we talked about what the LSAT is about. Already by experiencing a question, we are going to talk about the structure of the LSAT in a moment. There are 3 question types on the LSAT: logical reasoning, logic games, and reading comprehension. We are going to look at all 3 today. We'll talk about how do I get a high LSAT score. So if you want to share in the chat box, again, I only see that if you put it in the chat box to all panelists. I'd love to know what is the score that you're hoping to achieve. What is that good score that if you get that score, you're going to be happy? So I'd love to hear that, because that's, again, going to tell me, like, if you guys want a 150 or 160 or 170, I might have to share some different tips with you. So it would be helpful if you share that in the chat box. And then, of course, we're going to finish with some great goodbyes. So let's talk about the LSAT. It is a 4-hour-long exam. Normally, it has been a paper-based exam for many years. It's been now transitioned to a digital tablet-based test. It is offered worldwide 9 times a year, and every time you take it, it costs $200, American dollars. The structure of the test is in front of you. You see logical reasoning, logic games. You see a reading comprehension section. There's one experimental section. There's also writing sample you take at home, and you have one 15-minute break. So that's how traditional exam works. That's why it's 4 hours long, and you take it along with many other people in the same test center. You do not need to bring your own tablet. The tablet, which is a Microsoft Surface tablet, is going to be provided for you. However, as you probably can imagine, due to the COVID pandemic, the in-person exams have been canceled. The March exam has been canceled. The April exam is now going to be administered in what's called an LSAT-Flex. So will be the June exam. So what is the LSAT-Flex? Well, that is essentially an exam that you take at home. It is a shorter exam. It's 1 hour and 45 minutes long, no breaks. It is taken at home using an online proctor. So somebody is going to proctor you in real time. And that is going to be done through video and through audio. You cannot have anybody else in the room. You cannot have any study aids whatsoever. You are not going to be taking it on a tablet PC. It is going to be on a computer. You're going to be choosing your answer on a computer. You are allowed 5 sheets of blank paper that you will be taking, as well as a pencil, eraser, highlighter, and an analog digital wristwatch, or analog wristwatch. Digital wristwatches are not allowed. So essentially, we are going back to the same kinds of requirements that you've seen on a paper exam, and for example, with a pencil and so on. But now all of the questions are going to be on a computer. There's a special software that's used for the delivery. That software makes sure that there's nothing else that's running on your computer, no sort of a screen capturing software or anything like this. So you would not be able to capture these questions and release them to on the internet to somebody who's taking the exam, for example, the next day. It does cost exactly the same, $200. And the biggest and the most important probably change is that you are going to see only 3 sections. On the traditional exam, there are 2 logical reasoning sections and there's 1 experimental section. So there are 5 sections in total. Here you have 3. That means you're going to have only 1 logical reasoning section, essentially half of logical reasoning questions that you would normally see on the exam. You will see exactly the same number of reading comprehension and logic games questions. The question difficulty, the question distribution is going to be the same, but you see fewer questions. Instead of approximately 100 questions, you're going to see approximately 75 questions. Now, this exam, just like any other exam, is going to be then scaled and bell curved, and the number of questions that you answer is going to be translated into your 120 to 180 score. The exam is still, the LSAC still claims that the exam is going to be accurate, even though there are fewer questions. So it's still going to be scaled the same way because everything is going to be measured by a computer, and the computer will crunch some data and will then spit out the distribution. So you are again going to be measured compared to how everybody else does on this specific test, right? Not compared to how somebody else does on a longer test, compared to how everybody does on this specific test. Now, how generally the scoring system works is that the LSAT is going to calculate the number of questions you get right, and that is your raw score. There is no penalty for guessing, and there are no bonus marks for harder questions. So every question weighs exactly the same. That means that as you're going through questions, you want to make sure that you have enough time for easy and medium questions, and you also get at least some of the difficult questions right. So your time management is going to be important. Your prioritization management is going to be important, because you need to make sure that you get to all easy questions, and they are all not going to necessarily be at the beginning of the test. They're going to be sprinkled all throughout the test. Now, I'd like to bust some myths about the LSAT. First of all, some people are thinking that I need to really understand the law to try to get into a law school. That is absolutely not true. In fact, no subject matter about law, about anything else, about ethics or about molecular biology is being tested on the LSAT. So you don't really need to know anything specific for the LSAT. Some people also saying you can't really study for the LSAT because, of course, there's nothing really that you need to know. Well, the thing is, the LSAT tests a fairly large variety of different skills. And if you currently don't have these skills, you can acquire these skills. Now, some of these skills are going to be, for example, time management, prioritization management, reading carefully, knowing how to read well, knowing how to take good notes. All of these are skills that are going to help you on the LSAT. Some people are also thinking you can't really succeed in the logic games because logic games look like complicated math problems. Well, the logic games are essentially testing another set of skills. They test your analytical reasoning abilities. Just like any other skill, you can certainly acquire that skill as well. Some people are thinking maybe they apply this to themselves, or maybe they know people who done really well on the LSAT and they think, well, they're really smart, so that's why they've done well. Or I'm really smart, I'm going to do really well on the LSAT. Well, remember, the LSAT isn't an IQ test. Whether you're smart or you don't think you're smart, your success on the LSAT isn't necessarily highly correlated. Now, people who consider themselves smart usually are good in studying. So they have the right studying skills. That's why they probably know a lot. So as long as you have the right studying skills to prepare for this sort of a skills-based exam, then you certainly can do well on the LSAT. Now, how important is the LSAT when you're applying to law schools? Well, it's actually very important. This is a survey that was done by different law schools or by the LSAT when the LSAT asked different law schools what actually goes into your decision for admitting candidates. And the answer was that about 2/3 of the application is based on the LSAT score. And then there's some other things that are important as well, and certain things that are not that important, like letters of recommendation, don't really play a big role. However, when we talk about what was the reason why some candidates got rejected, you would also notice that an LSAT score is an important factor. However, certain other things such as a badly written personal statement or a bad letter of recommendation that actually don't recommend that the candidate goes to the school would be a good enough reason for candidates to be rejected. So make sure that essentially the takeaway from this is make sure you have a good LSAT score and make sure that you don't have badly written personal statement or bad letters of recommendation. If you have really awesome letters of recommendation, they're not going to help, but bad letters of recommendation are certainly going to hurt. What is going to help is a really awesome LSAT score. Now, law schools generally would have different cycles. Here in Ontario, where I'm from, the application cycle is all the same for different schools. The application deadline is November 1st, and you need to submit your application by that timeline. Your LSAT score does not have to be done by that timeline, but the rest of your application has to be completed by that timeline. Most of the schools in the United States follow their own deadlines, and sometimes they have different rounds as well. Now, if you are planning to apply to a school in Ontario, then please make sure that you have your application completed by that deadline, by November 1st, and also make sure that your LSAT score is submitted by end of the year. So the final date for you to really complete your LSAT should be the end of December. Now, somebody was asking a question is, how do I register for the LSAT and how do I actually send my score to different schools? Well, when you register for the LSAT, you would simply go on to lsac.org, lsac.org, and you're going to book your exam, you're going to pay your fee, and you are going to select the schools to which you want to send your scores. Then the scores are going to be sent directly from the LSAT to these schools, and then you do not take part in that process. And then when the school receives the rest of your application, then it will be able to assess you and make a decision of whether you are admitted or rejected from your application. Now, let's talk about some of the reasons why the LSAT is hard. I would really love some participation. So if you want to put things in the chat box, and by the way, the exercises we are going to do, they absolutely will require participation. So if you guys are not ready to participate, then these exercises are just not going to work because they're not really designed for me to show you things. They're really designed for us to work together. So here are some of the reasons why some of our clients normally share with us, especially when they come to a live in-person class. So why is the LSAT hard? Well, some of the people are saying, well, we're just not good with logic. The exam seems somewhat subjective. Sometimes I look at the answer choices and it seems like both of them are pretty good, but maybe this one is a little bit better. I can think and somebody else can think that that one is better. It's a pretty fast-paced exam. There's lots of jargon. The environment of taking the exam is fairly stressful, and as a result, you fall into a few traps. Misreading is one of the traps. Managing your time well is one of the traps. And also, yeah, you can learn a lot of theory. You can read a lot of books about the LSAT. You can read all of the books in the world, and then when you go for the test, if you haven't learned the strategies for doing well, and if you haven't practiced enough, you're still going to get medium scores. Now, we see these people quite a lot. There are people who keep coming to our seminars. We see them at different events, and they're still, it sometimes takes them years and they don't see any progress. So why? They keep practicing, but they don't really see any improvement because they haven't learned the strategies. They learn the theory. They're really good with the theory. They know all the rules of logic, but they haven't really mastered that process. So how do you master that process? How do you actually win this game? Well, I want to give you an analogy, and that is essentially going to be an analogy of learning a new trade, a new skill. So for example, if you want to learn how to make shoes, well, what you're going to do is you probably first need to watch somebody do it. So you need to watch somebody show you how to do questions on the LSAT and show you the strategies. And then you're going to try yourself. And while you're doing this, you would want to get some feedback, because the first time you try it, you're not going to be successful. So that is why for studying for this specific exam, studying with books for most people does not work. Because if you are trying to prepare for, let's say, an exam in history, that all that it does, it requires you to memorize some history facts, then you can absolutely rely on your memory and study with books. But the LSAT is a very practical exam. You do need to try things out, and you also need to recognize when things are not working. And if you haven't learned these strategies, and if you don't have anybody to point to where you're making mistakes and how you can do things better, you are not going to see any improvement. So this process is really, really important, that you work with somebody who's already mastered this skill. If you have a friend or a brother or sister who's mastered the skill and is willing to teach you, then you can absolutely should take advantage of that. But if you don't, that's why the professional services such as ours exist, and classes are usually the most affordable way of learning the LSAT, or you can work with a tutor one-on-one. But it's really important that you are able to get this feedback, because the first time you try things, you probably are not going to be successful at first. All right, so this is the part when we really are going to work on a few things together. So what I'd like to ask you to do is, what I'm actually going to do is I will unmute you right now. So you are going to be able to unmute yourself. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask you to tell me, and you can certainly do that by voice or by simply putting things in a chat box. What is an argument? When you see an argument, how do you know that what's in front of you is an argument? Or maybe have you seen arguments before, and how do they look like? Okay, perfect. Yes, thanks for sharing this. So an argument is not necessarily what you would normally see in our everyday life. An argument is some sort of a line of reasoning that's presented in a structured way. Essentially, an argument must have a conclusion, also known as a claim. Let me give you an example of an argument. For example, I've decided to get into a top law schools. That made me realize if I get a professional LSAT training, then I will be more successful in the LSAT. Right? So what I'm trying to say is I will be more successful in the LSAT. Now, how do I know that? Is I'm providing some support, some evidence. And the evidence here in this example is if I get professional LSAT training, then I will be more successful in the LSAT. So that's essentially my line of reasoning. In very simple terms, it's an if-then sentence. Now, if I do this, then I'm going to get this. I'm going to give you a few more examples of different structures. And of course, you can have just some extra background information in the argument that doesn't necessarily maybe contribute to that argument. Now, arguments generally involve logic, and the arguments on the LSAT must be logical. So breaking them down into some of the symbols of formal logic is something that can help you really absorb all of the information that you see in front of you. For example, we can take a look at a very simple argument. If Alan goes to the cinema, then Barbara goes with him. So if A, then B. What you can also do is you can connect the formal logic phrases into this chain to create the logic chains. For example, if A, I know if A, then I know B. And if B, then I know C. So if A, then that should lead me to C, because A leads to B, B leads to C. So A therefore leads to C. Right, that's pretty straightforward. You can see an example here at the bottom of the screen. So I'd like to ask you a question then. What do you know if Anna does not go swimming? So here you see what if Anna does go swimming, then Bob will go to the mall and Carol will drive to work. But what if Anna does not go swimming? Again, you can unmute yourself, or you can just put it in the chat box. I would really appreciate if you unmute yourself. This is a very small class, so it'd be really good to have a voice discussion. You don't have to share your webcam, but you can certainly unmute yourself. Okay, so then Bob won't go to the mall and Carol won't drive to work. Okay, anybody else? Does anybody have a different opinion of what do we know if Anna does not go swimming? Okay, Bob doesn't go to the mall.
If Anna doesn't go, I don't think we have any additional information that we can assume.
Okay, and you're actually absolutely right. The logic here works one way. If Anna does not go swimming, we actually don't know anything about Bob. And we don't know anything about Carol. Notice this arrow, it's pointing in only one direction. What we do know for sure, if Anna goes swimming, we know something about Bob. But if she doesn't, Bob could still have gone to the mall. So I'd like to ask you a slightly more challenging question. What do we know if Bob does not go to the mall?
Then we know that Anna did not go to the mall.
Okay, and what about Carol? Do we know anything about Carol? Yes, okay, perfect. You're absolutely right. What we do know is that if Bob does not go to the mall, Anna couldn't have gone swimming, because if she did go swimming, he would have gone to the mall. But he didn't, so she could not have gone swimming. And we do not know anything about Carol, again, because of the way that the logic is organized. And this actually brings us to the discussion about what's called a contrapositive. So what is a contrapositive? That is essentially a way for us to flip the logic in that chain so that we can have B first and A second. Let me give you an example. If I live in Toronto, then I live in Canada. Let's imagine there's only one city of Toronto. So if I'm in Toronto, I must be in Canada. But if I want to flip that direction, if I want Canada to be first and Toronto to be second, then saying that if I'm in Canada, then I'm in Toronto, I can't really say this because I could be somewhere else. Saying if I'm not in Canada, then I'm not in Toronto would be accurate. Because if you're not in Canada, you cannot possibly be in Toronto. So that's what's called a contrapositive. You're flipping the direction of the logic, and you also making each statement a not statement. Right? This gets a little more tricky when you're dealing with and or statements. Essentially, the and is going to become an or, and the or becomes an and. So for example, if you say, if I live in Toronto or Montreal, then I'm in Canada. But if I'm not in Canada, then I'm not in Toronto and I'm not in Montreal. So that's how contrapositive works. Now, of course, we said the if-then statement is a very simple example. There's a conditional statement. However, we could see different types of structures on the LSAT, different types of argument structures. You can have a conclusion at the beginning, at the end, in the middle, essentially anywhere. And what can help us understand where the conclusion is looking at some of the keywords. For example, the keyword therefore tells us where's the conclusion. Or sometimes we can have keywords that tell us where the evidence is. After all is a very good evidence keyword. Whenever you see after all, then you know that what's coming after it is an evidence. Then in the third example, you also see what's called a contrasted opinion. So if somebody is presenting an opinion, and that's something you've seen today at the first argument that we've done, then I could disagree with that opinion, and my conclusion is essentially the opposite of what these other people believe. So if I'm saying that this person is wrong, I'm not really saying this to try to prove somebody wrong. I'm not trying to be nasty. I'm not trying to get into arguments with anybody. All I'm saying is that their opinion is wrong. Therefore, my conclusion would be the opposite of that opinion. Right? So that's essentially what you should start noticing. And in fact, there's a question type on the LSAT that has to do with the parallel reasoning of the arguments. So what is parallel reasoning? That essentially means that the reasoning and the logic is the same, but the subject matter is different. I'm going to show you arguments right now that are parallel to the arguments we've just seen, because the structure of them is exactly the same, but they deal with a completely different subject matter. And that is always going to be the case when you're looking at parallel reasoning questions, right? So in fact, questions that are of the same subject matter are 99.9% of the time trap answers. Now, sometimes when you look at the argument, you're going to wonder, is this a good argument or is this a bad argument? Sometimes it helps to understand that, because if you're trying to find a similar or parallel argument to a bad argument, you're going to be looking for bad arguments. And if you're looking at good arguments, you'll be looking at good arguments in the answer choices. So let's take a look at an argument, and I would love to hear from you whether you believe this is a good or a bad argument. So here's an argument. Grass is always purple. Of course, we know that, right? We live in Canada, so we haven't seen grass for a few months now. So we've completely forgotten. And everything that is purple can speak Latin. Okay, that sounds interesting. So what is the conclusion here? Therefore, anybody want to try to predict What's going to come after therefore? If you see these two statements, therefore what? So therefore, you're just going to try to read your mind here. Yes, perfect. Thank you. Grass can speak white. How did you know? It's because this is a syllogism. This is the simplest form of an argument. A leads to B, B leads to C, therefore A leads to C. Very, very simple. This type of an argument has been around since ancient Greece, and it's called actually syllogism. Now, you knew this right away because this is a very logical argument. However, this argument, this specific argument, is not necessarily truthful. It is not providing us truthful facts. Nevertheless, when you're trying to assess whether this is a good argument, then you probably would say that yes, it is. It is a pretty good argument because the logic here is good. There's actually nothing wrong with the logic. So when you're trying to assess the arguments, remember, it's only the logic you're looking at. You are not looking at the subject matter. Actually, we are going to do an exercise a little bit later on where you have to be really careful about not falling into that trap of trying to assess the truthfulness of the facts, because you don't really need to know anything about the color of the grass or who speaks Latin. All right, so we'll come back to logical reasoning, but I'd like to talk a little bit about reading comprehension right now, and then we'll get to logic games. Now, reading comprehension is an area that some people love and some people hate, and there's usually very few people who are indifferent to it. And many people consider it hard. And there are many good reasons why it's hard. So let me just give you a few reasons. First of all, there is a lot to read. You're going to have the most questions in reading comprehension compared to all of the other question types. There are approximately 26 to 28 reading comprehension questions. So you will probably feel pretty tired as you're doing them. Lots of things to read, some complex words and passage structures. Certainly not enough time, because if you can imagine, in 35 minutes, you need to read 4 passages and answer about 27, 28 questions. So the time pressure is really going to be severe on this section. We have lots of things to read, and each passage contains 6 to 7 questions. You can't really look at all of the questions and keep them all in your brain while you're reading a passage. So you have to almost distance yourself from the questions and think about the passage first, and then use what you've read to answer the questions. And that is a challenge, because without reading all 7 questions up front, you don't really know what is going to be coming. So certainly reading the passage is a skill. One thing, however, of why you should not be worried about reading comprehension is the fact that the passages are going to be on topics that you might not know anything about. In fact, that absolutely makes no difference of what the passage is about. The subject matter all is presented in front of you in the passage. You just need to know how to read the passage. So how are we going to read the passage? Well, we are going to refocus our reading from what the author is saying to how the author is making a point. That is different. You're going to be reading for structure, not the content. And that is why you don't need to understand the content, and knowing that content isn't going to help. Sometimes it even is going to hurt. You're going to be focusing on how the author is creating a narrative. Essentially, how is the author outlining the story that he or she is trying to tell? And that story is going to be presented in one of 4 passage voices. So essentially, that's a way to think about what kind of a role the author would play in presenting this passage. There are 4 different roles. We're going to go through them one by one: the explainer, the investigator, the analyst, and the arguer. So let's talk about them. The explainer is somebody who simply explains a point. There is no opinion in that passage. And if you'd like an analogy from a courtroom, since of course you're thinking of getting to the law school, that analogy is going to be, that is a court reporter. The language here is usually very dry, and many of science passages would be written in the explainer voice. The next voice is the investigator. That is when the author is trying to have some analysis. However, is taking a completely unbiased role. The author does not take sides, does not favor any of the points, simply is trying to analyze what is going on. And in a courtroom, that is going to be the judge. You are going to pick this up pretty quickly when you're reading the passages. If there is some critical analysis going on, but there's no opinion, that's the investigator. If there's simply statement of a lot of facts or report on certain experiments that have been done, maybe some scientific research, well, then the author is the explainer. Well, the next one on the scale is going to be the analyst. This is when the author does do the critical analysis, but at the end chooses one of the sides. That is going to be, in a courtroom, the jury. And then finally, we've missed the arguer. This is a person who is taking a biased view. That's a person who is not trying to be fair. This is not a person who is trying to be maybe even necessarily honest. This is a person who is simply saying why I am right and somebody else is wrong. You're going to also see that. You're going to see that by the author using a lot of keywords, such as these explanations are despicable or disgusting, or the authors are even going as far as trying to claim A or trying to claim B. And of course, in a courtroom, that is going to be the lawyer or the defendant or the plaintiff. So these four passage voices are going to help you. You can get pretty skilled at this in probably less than a day as you're reading and you're noticing these keywords, usually some of these emotional keywords. So what topics are you going to see? Well, first of all, natural sciences, a lot of them are going to be explainer passages. A lot of the social sciences passages are going to be really on a scale from being the explainer to being an arguer and anything in between. A lot of them are actually biased and a lot of them are arguer passages when the author is very clearly taking one of the sides. Humanities, many of them are going to be like that as well. And law related, again, could be on a complete range of voices, range of opinions. You are very likely going to see one passage of each because the LSAT wants to be fair to people from different backgrounds. Now, how do you train yourself to really do well in reading comprehension? Well, you're going to start retraining yourself how to read differently. So how do you actually do this? What's the actual process that you're going to go through? Well, as you're reading, you're going to start picking up what is the voice of the passage, and you'll make a note of that. You're also going to try to understand what was the purpose of each of the paragraphs. So essentially, how is the passage organized? Is paragraph 2 related to paragraph 1 because it's trying to expand on that point from paragraph 1? Is paragraph 2 trying to present a different opinion from paragraph 1? And so on and so forth. And finally, you're going to answer this question. What was the primary purpose of this passage? Why did the author write this passage? Why did the author go into trouble of writing it? That is also something that is going to be important for many questions on the LSAT that are going to deal with questions about the entire passage. Some of the questions are about some specific details in the passage, but many questions are going to be about the entire passage. Understanding what's the primary purpose or the primary concern is going to help you answer these questions. So as long as you can answer these questions as you go along, and as long as you learn how to take good notes and notice the structure and the keywords of what you see in front of you, you should be able to handle almost every question on the reading comprehension section. Many of our students would report to us that they did very, very well in the reading comprehension section because they've learned how to read. That is a very, very important skill. Of course, knowing what questions to expect is also very important. So in our class, we dedicate approximately 8 hours in class to reading comprehension, of which we spend about the first 2 to 3 hours learning how to read and noticing all kinds of different idiosyncrasies on what you should be focusing on. And then we spend the balance of the time learning the questions and then practicing and making sure you really master answering these questions. You should probably be reading every day by now if your LSAT exam is coming up soon. So what should you read? Well, certainly reading LSAT passages is going to help. You can also read magazines such as The Economist, the Harvard Alumni Magazine, the Scientific American. That's all that's going to help. The Time Magazine. You can also focus on some of the poorly written material. For example, you can pick up an academic article from a specialized magazine and try to understand what this person was trying to say and really cut through the jargon. That is going to help you, because even hard scientific articles have a certain structure. It's just so hard to read because a lot of them are using passive voice and a lot of them are using some complicated language and complicated jargon. So really training your eye for looking for the things that are important and ignoring things that are not that important is going to pay big dividends on the day of the test. And make sure you don't just read things that you like, read things that you don't like. Read articles in your field and read articles not in your field as well. All right, if you have any questions about anything we've covered so far, please put them in a chat box. There's also a Q&A box. So if you put things in the Q&A box, I will make sure that we address your questions at the end of our seminar tonight. But what I'd like to do is focus a little bit over the next probably about 20 minutes on talking about logic games. Now, many people really hate logic games, and they are afraid of logic games because they look like complicated math problems. However, there are no math problems. They do test your ability to reason in a very methodical and very logical manner. And if you have some ability to think in a very mathematical way, then that is going to help. But the mathematical skills are not necessary. The most important thing is for you to be very well organized. Your attention to detail and your ability to reason in a very formal, very structured way is going to lead you to potentially a perfect score on logic games as well. A lot of the things that we do in class is we focus on these processes, and then many of our students would then say that they have scored very close to perfect or perfect on logic games, again, if you practice this. Your ability to recognize what type of a game is in front of you, and then knowing how to organize your work and knowing how to prioritize your questions can easily lead you to perfect scores. Many of our instructors do a lot of practice tests to continue demonstrating their proficiency, and almost all of them on almost all practice tests score perfect on logic games. It's rare to score perfect in logical reasoning, by the way. It's much less common to score perfect in reading comprehension, though it is possible. But in logic games, it is fairly common. Now, so you have a question here. How do they know the breakdown? If you could please expand on it. I just try to understand what exactly what are you asking. If you would like to maybe unmute yourself and ask the question, that would be great. Otherwise, in the chat box, if you can just please expand what your question is, I will make sure that we can talk about that. Okay, so how do you know that on a practice test? Obviously, you would know that. On the real test is because many of the tests are disclosed. So at the end of the test, you are going to be able to see what questions you got right or wrong. Yeah, but on a practice test, you certainly can do that because you know the answers at the end of the test, right? So how can you get ready for logic games? You are going to, first of all, do a lot of logic games. And secondly, you can do certain things outside of your logic games to still prepare you. For example, what you could do is you could play different games that involve the same sort of skills. For example, Sudoku, believe it or not, uses the same, very similar skills to what you're going to see on logic games. You have to be very well organized. So you can just play it for fun. You can also take some classes in formal logic. There's a really good class at the Stanford University that's offered online through the Coursera website. It is a free course. It's an amazing course. It's called Introduction to Formal Logic, I believe. And you can take this course for free on coursera.org. Also, you can just try some mathematical puzzles. There are also all sorts of books with brain teasers. If you can handle these brain teasers well, you can also do well on the logic games. I'd actually like to play a game with you. This is a game from Prep Test 22. You can find it in Prep Test 22. I am going to keep it here on the screen for you as we play this game. But I'd like for you to perhaps take a minute or so to try to understand what is going on in this game. And then we're going to look at different ways to approach this game. Okay, I hope you had some time to go through this. So let's take a look. What is really going on here? Well, I mean, what we have here is we have 4 training sessions, and we need to schedule them on days 1 through 4. So there's some scheduling involved, as well as we have 6 professionals, 3 nurses, and 3 psychologists who will teach these sessions. And conveniently, they're called FJNL and TV and W. We also know that the session will be taught by, each session will be taught by 1 nurse and 1 psychologist. So after simply reading this, what do we already know? So 4 days, 4 sessions, 3 nurses, and 3 psychologists. What can we draw from this already without even going to the rules? Again, if you want to unmute yourself, I think that would be helpful. This is a very, very small session. So I think we can have this as a little more interactive session. The microphone is not working. You can certainly put this in the chat box, but this is really the time when I'd like to do this together with you, because I'd like to make sure that you walk away with not just seeing somebody else do the question, but you actually had a chance to think through this question yourself. So what do we already know so far? Okay, well, I would imagine that probably was hard for you to really understand what we do know. So let me help you here. Now, what we do know is that we have 3 nurses and 3 psychologists and 4 days. So what this means is that one of them, at least one of them, is going to be teaching more than once. And actually, let's take a look at our rules. Now, we know that each professional teaches at least once. We know that we have one of the professionals already allocated for day 3. We also know that, okay, neither final Leopold teaches with Tyler. Okay, that's great. We have so we have some information that I think we're going to be using to answer our questions. So what we're going to do is we're going to essentially read the game, which what we've just done, read the rules, and then we're going to try to compare each question to these rules. So we've gained some insights, not too many, and we're going to try now to answer the question. So that's the first question. If R is the only session for which Leopold is scheduled, what could be the pair of professionals scheduled for day 2? Now, what we're going to do is we'll read the answer choices and see if they break any rules. Now, here are the rules. And if you go through the answer choices, you would say, okay, so Fine and Tyler, is that possible on day 2? Well, wait a second. Okay, Fine doesn't teach with Tyler, so that breaks rule 3. Fine and 1, is that possible? Yeah, looks like it is possible. Doesn't seem to break any rules. Johnson and Tyler, is that possible? Yeah, it seems okay. Johnson and 1, is that possible? Yeah, why not? Leopold and 1, is that possible? Leopold and 1, okay, Leopold and 1. Well, Leopold is teaching on day 3. So according to the question, he only teaches on 1 session, so can't really be teaching on day 2, right? So if we miss the condition in the question, then we would certainly maybe answer this incorrectly. But we're still down to only 3 answer choices. And I'm not really quite sure how to now choose between them because they all seem to work. So after about 3 to 4 minutes, we probably give up, or maybe we choose randomly. We have a 33% chance of getting this right. Well, let's take a look at the next question. Maybe it's going to be easier. What could be the order in which the nurses teach the sessions from day 1 through day 4? Well, let's take a look. Could we have Fine, Johnson, Leopold, and Leopold? Yeah, maybe. Doesn't really seem like it breaks any rule. How about Fine, Leopold, Leopold, Johnson? Yeah, probably. Johnson, Johnson, Leopold, Fine there. That's also possible. Johnson, Leopold, Leopold, Johnson. Yeah, that's not possible because Fine's not teaching. That breaks the first rule. And the same with E, that Johnson is not teaching. That breaks the rule. So now we have 3 answer choices left. And the way for us to do this is we're going to need to see what else is going to happen. If we actually allocate them that way, if we put them in that sequence, what else is going to be affected? So we'll see what happens to psychiatrists. And then after some time, we'll actually be able to pick an answer. But it is going to take quite a large amount of time for us to test all of these sequences. So it already seems painful to do this question. By the way, we've already spent probably more time than we should have on this entire game, but let's keep going. Let's see if we can find something easier. Now, what we can also do is look at this next question. Hopefully it might be easier. What could be the session and the professional scheduled for day 4? Okay, let's look at the rules again. Does A break any rule? M Fine and 1? Doesn't seem like it. O Fine and Tyler? Fine does not teach with Tyler, so that breaks our rule. Oh, Johnson and Tyler? No, because Johnson teaches session S only, so that breaks our 4th rule. R, Fine, and 1. Yeah, sounds like it's possible. And S, Fine, Vitali, not possible because Johnson teaches session S. So now we're down again to 2 answer choices that are still possible. A and D, we need to test them out, see what else happens. Every time you're going to test things out, it is going to take some time. So after this 3rd question, most people run out of time. And then when we get to our 4th question, the 5th question, there were 5 questions in this game, we literally just don't have the time. We have to move on to the next game. hopefully not the next section. So let's look at a better way of doing this question. Simply comparing each question to the rules isn't really going to be efficient. So what we can maybe do is we can learn some rules. And the rules are that this is what's called a sequencing. This is a hybrid game, which is a sequencing matching game. You're trying to sequence the sessions in the 4 days that you're trying to match the nurses and the psychiatrists to, or psychologists to these sessions. So let's take a look if we can do that, if we can actually keep our work organized. Now, what we do know is that they all teach. We also know that Leopold is on day 3. We know neither Fine nor Leopold teaches with Tyler. That means Johnson has to teach with Tyler, right? So this was a roundabout way of basically saying only Johnson teaches with Tyler. We do know that Johnson teaches only session S, so that's helpful. We also know that M comes after S. So I think we've gained some good insights here so far. So now we're going to use this diagram. We're actually going to put things in a diagram as we're answering the questions. We spend about 2 to 3 minutes to answering these questions. To analyzing the rules, and we've gained some insights. So hopefully these insights are going to help us. And this is as far as most people go when they're studying for the LSAT, because that's what primarily all of these books and Bibles are going to teach you. So let's take a look at how this is going to help us now. Let's look at our first question. You already remember that question? Fine and Tyler, is that possible? Well, no, because it breaks our rule that Johnson teaches with Tyler. B, C, don't break any rules. However, Johnson and 1, we can see by now that that breaks our rule of Johnson teaching session S. And then the fifth question is going to break our rule in question because R is the only session for which Leopold is scheduled. That means session R has to be on day 3, and Leopold cannot teach anything else. So now we have a better chance, it's 50-50, and then we're going to test these two, and then we're going to actually find an answer, which in this case is B. And we did work it more efficiently. It took us only 2 minutes to do that question. And we did get the right answer, fortunately. So now let's take a look at the second question. I will show you another way of doing this question, so you don't need to take notes necessarily here, but I do want to show you how most people do this question. It's this way. People who have been studying. People who haven't been studying do them the first way. So again, what was the question? What could be the order of nurses? So here is the chart. So Fine, Johnson, Leopold, Leopold, it does fit in the chart, so that should be okay. Fine, Leopold, Leopold, Johnson also does fit in the chart, so that should be okay. Johnson, Johnson, Leopold, Fine also fits in the chart. Look at that. Leopold is in the 3rd place, so all of these still seem okay. Now D, Leopold's also in 3rd place, but it does break the rule that Fine is not teaching. And in E, it breaks a couple of rules because Leopold is not teaching number 3, and also Johnson is not teaching. So now we're gonna have to test again 3 of these, and it is going to be a little quicker because now we have actually some sort of organization. And after about 3 to 4 minutes, we find the answer, and there is the right answer. Things might get a little tricky if we start dealing with questions that we're going to talk about next. For example, what could be the session and the professional scheduled for day 4? Well, M, Fine, and 1 seems like it's okay. O, Fine, and Tyler breaks our rule. O, Johnson and Tyler breaks another rule. R, Fine, and 1 again seems okay. And S, Fine, and Vitali breaks a couple of rules. Now, this is a could-be question. In a could-be question, if we end up with 2 answer choices that seem like they could be true, we are really stuck. We do have to now test them to see if anything else is going to be broken. And in that case, A is going to break another rule if we start putting the rest of the professionals on the chart. So that will help us find an answer that is going to be D, but it is going to take us some time. So these questions are going to be a little trickier. Let's take a look at the next question. We haven't really quite gotten to that question, and that is a question that's even trickier. And that is if O is scheduled for day 3, which must be the session scheduled for day 4. Now, must be means that it has to be there no matter what. So we could have more than one answer choice that could be true, but only one of them must be true. Now, let's take a look. Is R possible on day 4? Yes, it is possible. Well, we don't know if it has to be there. We know it's possible. Let's see if any other would be possible. Well, could S be on day 4? No, actually, that is not possible because M comes after S. So that is not going to work. Is fine possible to be on day 4? Yeah, it is possible. How about Leopold? Is that possible? Well, yes, because somebody is teaching twice. So that is possible. And how about Vitali? Is that possible? Yeah, it is also possible. So this is really tricky because we found 4 answer choices that could be true. They're all possible, but we can't really figure out which one must be there. We really have to look at all kinds of possible combinations to see what must be true. And that's going to take some time. And honestly, many people at this point are going to just simply give up. And we're not going to get to our 5th question because we've spent so much time on the first 4. So what I wanted to show you with this is that, yes, knowing the rules is really helpful. However, if you are simply applying these rules without having learned and practiced the skill of doing these questions and really the process of doing these questions, then doing well and getting to that maybe perfect or near perfect score is going to be next to impossible. So let's look at the way that you should be approaching these questions. And that is the way that's actually going to help you get to a very high score. Let's go with the mastery way. Now, the mastery is comprised of 3 things, 3 steps. Step number 1 is you learn some basics. For example, you learn the basics of how the games are organized, how to read properly. You also know some rules. For example, you recognize that you will also learn how to, you would practice enough so that whenever you see this question, you would really be able to master that skill. So let's see how we can do this. Now, we are going to take some notes. First of all, we know that they all teach. We also know that Leopold is in day 3. We know Johnson and Tyler, again, teach together. We also know that session S is the session that they teach. But what does this mean? Is there anything we can draw from this? Is there any additional insight that we can draw? Well, let's take a look. Now, if session S is coming after session M, I'd like to ask you, where could session S be? Where could we put session S? On what day? Knowing that after S, we need to have M. Where realistically we could put session S? Again, you can just simply unmute yourself. Don't be shy. Or put it in the chat box. And the question was, where could you put session S?
From what I gather, I think S could be on either 2 or 1 or 2.
1 or 2. Thanks, Jamie. And why not on 3?
Because L, whoever L was, I forget who L is. Leopold. because Leopold is set up for that day, and S can only be connected with J or Johnson.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. So what this actually means is that we could have only one of two options. So let's actually call them two options. And option one is going to be when S is first and M is second. And option two is going to be when S is second and M is third. There is no other option. So that's a very interesting insight, because what we can do now is we could start filling out this chart. Because we know where S is, we also know where Johnson and Tyler is in both options 1 and 2. And we also know where the rest of the things go. So for example, we would know where the rest of the sessions go in both options. We also know where the rest of the nurses go and where the rest of the psychologists go. So we've essentially filled out every possible combination, and they are in front of us in these two different options. So we spent some time, certainly we had to think through this, but we've gained a lot of insights, because really what we see in front of us is every possible combination of what could happen. So if we see questions in the game that are giving us additional conditions, then all we need to do is look at the options and start narrowing down these conditions. So you would see how our job answering the questions is now going to be so much easier, because we have done this work up front. By the way, this deduction, the two-option deduction, is something that, of course, you have to train yourself for, and know to look for it. And it usually comes in sequencing games when you have entities, for example, sessions, moving together, and they have a certain sequence, they have a certain pattern, and you can only fit that pattern a certain specific way. Usually there are only two ways. And that's actually an amazing deduction, because it's going to save us so much time when we're dealing with this game. Well, let's take a look. Let's actually see how it's going to help us. Question number 1. R is the only session for which Leopold is scheduled. Which of these two options do you think is going to work? Option 1 or option 2? Or R is the only session for which Leopold is scheduled. Just put it in the chat box if you'd like. Everything's in front of us right now, right? So R is the only session for which Leopold is scheduled. As you could see, the only option that would work is option 1. So we can get rid of option 2, and we'll get option 1 only. Which one of the following is a pair of professionals that could be scheduled for day 2 together? Fine and Tyler. Is that possible? No, it is not. How about Fine and 1? When I'm looking at my chart for day 2, I know it is possible. I do not have any other conditions. Therefore, I'm just going to pick it and move on. And I can do that in 30 seconds. Notice how so much quicker our job has become, because we know what are the all possible combinations. And we essentially narrowed this down. And from option 1, we got rid of Leopold. So we know for sure Fine is on day 2. And then Fine and 1, yeah, that's the only thing that works, because Tyler cannot teach on day 2. I find this fascinating, how so quickly we can narrow down the list of answer choices. We don't have to retest them. Now let's take a look at our question 2. Hopefully with this strategy, we can get to all of our questions. So what could be the order in which the nurses teach from days 1 through 4? Okay, well, I think in this case, all we need to do is look at our chart and see which one might fit. Fine, Johnson, Leopold, and Leopold. Is that something that is possible? Well, we don't have any more conditions. And if I'm looking at our charts, I'm actually noticing here that option 2 is something that can definitely accommodate this order of the nurses. So I'm just going to pick A and move on, because if it works and I don't have any other restrictions, then I know that's the only one that should work, because this is a could be question. So I can do this in 10 seconds, literally. Notice how it took us 8 minutes before. But let's take a look at the next question. We're doing quite well so far. We've invested some time in understanding the game and drawing the charts and doing this deduction, but now we're answering the question so much quicker. So now what could be the session and the professional scheduled for day 4? All right. M, fine, and 1. Is that possible? No, it is not, because M is not possible for day 4. How about O, fine, and Tyler? Not possible. O, Johnson, and Tyler. Well, again, I'm just scanning my eyes through that 4th column. O, Johnson, and Tyler. No, it is not possible. How about R, fine, and 1? Oh, yes, it is possible. I could see it in option 1. So I'm going to pick D and move on. I can literally do this really, really quickly. Again, because our charts gave us every possible combination. And we got this right. Well, maybe we can actually get to our questions 4 and 5. So if O is scheduled on day 3, which one must be scheduled for day 4? So must be means there is no other option. There could be nothing else on that day 4. Let's take a look at option A, session R. Now, if we know that O is on day 3, then we know for sure that R will be on day 4. Everything else on day 4 is still a maybe, but R is an absolute must. So the answer is A, and I am done. Now, finally, let's take a look at the last question. We haven't even gotten to that question before. Which one of the following must be false? Another one of those must be questions. Must be false now. So I'm going to be looking for something that cannot be true. Well, let's take a look. I do not have any other conditions, unlike the previous question. So I'm going to be looking for something that is already not a possibility in our charts. A says session O is scheduled for day 1. That is actually possible with our option 2. B says session S is scheduled for day 3. That is not possible. None of our options would include that possibility. So we know it is something that has to be false. It is not possible for this to be true. So I'm going to choose B, and I am done with this game. And I finished all of the questions in 2 minutes. 5 questions, 2 minutes, because I've invested 4 minutes up front. So 6 minutes, and I'm done with that game. I'm done, and I am done. So this is how you want to do these games. You really have to be very well organized. You have to learn the different types of games. And of course, you have to learn how to make deductions. Now, these deductions that we made, they were not random. There were some very specific things that we looked for in order for us to understand that indeed we have 2 options here. It's going to be all kinds of different deductions, so you have to be comfortable with them and notice them, and of course, practice enough to be able to use them. There are not too many, there are not hundreds of types of deductions, there are a few. Well, I hope you enjoyed this game, and certainly I hope you enjoyed the mastery way of doing this game, which is definitely a lot more enjoyable. Many people, when they learn this way of doing the games, they start enjoying the games, even though they were completely terrified of logic games before then. So what I'd like to do right now is, before we close and before I give you some tips on where you can go from here and how you can organize your studies, I would like to do one more question. That is going to be a harder question. It is going to be another example of a logical reasoning question. I'm actually going to give you 1.5 minutes to do this question. I'm going to be quiet. In fact, I will put myself on mute, and I'm going to ask you what the answer is in approximately 90 seconds. All right, so it has been now 90 seconds. Please choose an answer. I certainly don't expect that you've all gotten this right. It is absolutely not important. We are here to learn. So if you could please choose an answer, it doesn't really matter. This is an anonymous poll, so I am not even going to be able to see what answer you chose, and certainly nobody else is going to be able to see that. So I would really love for everybody to choose an answer, please. That would be great. And then we can actually see what the difficulty of the question is that. You should see a poll in front of you. If you can just click on an answer and choose what the answer is, that would be great. I'm going to end this in just a moment. And I'll talk about a couple of ways of approaching this question. All right, so let's talk about this question just for a moment. And let me show you a couple of ways of doing this question. One of the way is, again, is our sound right way. This is when we read the passage, we're going to read the question, we'll read the answer choices. It was a little hard to understand initially what's going on here. And what we do though know is that this is a question that has to do with an earthquake. There's some argument that's being made about the town being destroyed by an earthquake in AD 365. So we're going to be looking for something that is going to be familiar to us. So something that's relevant, essentially. What many people would say, something that's in scope of this question. So let's take a look. Well, ceremony and drinking vessels, they do seem weird. They don't really seem like they're in scope. B, however, does show us that we are dealing with an earthquake, with an island, with AD 365. So something familiar, something we've seen before, certainly looks relevant. C sounds a little weird. Coins, statues, and inscriptions, they all seem out of scope. Has nothing to do with our earthquake. Now, we will probably then go back and reread this. Not everybody answered this question, so I would imagine that you probably still were trying to understand what is going on there, or maybe you were trying to reread this question. And then after doing this analysis, what most people are going to do is they will just say, okay, I don't have a better way, so I'm just going to pick B and I'm going to move on. And it'll probably take you 5 minutes if I didn't stop you. So let's learn a different way of doing this question, and that is we're going to learn some rules. Now, one of the important rules about logical reasoning questions is that there's a different approach to logical reasoning questions. Now, there are some books that suggest that you read the question first, and there are some books that suggest that you read the passage first. I am a very, very big proponent of reading the question first. The reason why is that you don't have a lot of time, so you want to know what you're going to be focusing on. So if you read the question that says which one most strongly supports, then you would know that you are trying to strengthen essentially this argument. So strengthening the argument is going to be different from, let's say, finding an assumption or inferring something from the argument. So knowing what I'm doing is actually going to be very important in my approach. Now, how am I going to strengthen this hypothesis? Well, I need to understand what am I trying to strengthen. In this specific case, I'm strengthening, or I'm trying to make better, more believable, a hypothesis that the town was destroyed by the earthquake that occurred in AD 365. So I'm going to be then looking, after having understood this, understood where my conclusion, my evidence is, I'm going to try to see which of these answer choices would actually strengthen my hypothesis. Well, the fact that I have drinking vessels that are found and that were also found in some other graves doesn't really seem relevant to my conclusion. I'm looking for something that gives me a better idea about whether the town was actually destroyed by that earthquake. B, however, does seem to strengthen it. So that's great. I do have some extra information, so that is amazing. I'm going to keep that. C doesn't really seem to do anything, and neither does D or E. So after going through this analysis, I'm going to confidently pick B. I had some process that I was following, and after about 2 minutes, I would unfortunately get this question wrong. Because even though B looks so attractive, whether we just rely on what sounds right or whether we know some rules, the majority of the people do B. Now, I am doing sometimes this question in a class of 100 people, and in that class, there would be about 80 or 90 people who are going to pick B as the answer. But that is not the right answer. So this has to be a fairly difficult question if so few people get this right. If you've never seen this question before, and if you have gotten this question right, then congratulations. Well, we'll actually talk about what is the right answer in a moment. Let's talk about the mastery way of doing this question. So here's what you would do if you really master that skill. You go into it first, read the question, of course, and you understand that this is a strengths question. You will then read a passage and you identify your conclusion and evidence. Now, what is important is for you to be able to understand what you can actually play with in the argument. What are you exactly trying to strengthen? Because not everything could be strengthened in this argument. Well, what I mean is, what we do know so far is that there was a town on Cyprus. It's called Kurion. And we also know that at some point this town was destroyed. We do have some very strong evidence to believe that the town was destroyed by an earthquake. We have this pattern of debris and collapsed buildings. So that is something that we do know. And we do know this from these archaeologists' excavations. Now, we are, of course, not archaeologists, so we're not going to doubt their evidence. They've already presented to us. So we have a good enough reason to believe the town was indeed destroyed by an earthquake. We also do know that there was an earthquake in AD 365. That's also a fact that was presented at the very end of the paragraph, and it was preceded by words such as known to have occurred. So known to have occurred means we do know that. So what do we not know? What we don't know is, did this earthquake really destroy the town? Now, we know the fact that there was an earthquake, and we know some earthquake destroyed the town, but was it this specific earthquake, or was it some other earthquake? We do not know. So what we assume as an author is that it was that earthquake that destroyed the town and not some other earthquake that could have destroyed this town. Now, we know it was an earthquake. We just don't know which one. So we are going to be looking for additional information that points to the fact there was that specific earthquake and not something else. Well, let's see which answer choice will actually do that. Answer choice A doesn't really do anything. Doesn't give us any extra information, any extra insights. Answer choice B was such a clever trap by the exam makers because they gave us a fact that is certainly important, but it is a fact we already knew from the original passage. So by that mere fact, it cannot strengthen this argument because it simply regurgitates the information we already knew. Very clever. And we fell into this trap. Let's look at C. C tells us that when we dug out this town, we found a bunch of coins that were all minted in AD 365 and before that, and the year was actually minted on the coins, which was very convenient for archaeologists. However, they have found no coins after AD 365. What this means is that there was some sort of a significant disruption that happened in AD 365 that actually caused the town to stop minting coins. No coins, no economy. That means the town probably did not exist after AD 365. Now, if you put this piece of evidence together with the two other pieces of evidence that we already know, the fact that the town was destroyed by an earthquake and the town that there was an earthquake that year, and if we add to this the fact that there was no town after that year, all of a sudden we have a much clearer picture about what happened that year. We do have a much stronger reason to believe that indeed that earthquake destroyed the town. And that is why the answer choice C will definitely strengthen our argument. Now, I'd like to bring your attention to the wording of a question, which says, which one of the following, if true, most strongly supports the hypothesis? What this implies is that if we've found the answer choice that supports it, maybe there will be another answer choice that will support it even better. This is tempting. However, this is an absolute lie from the test makers. The reason why the test makers use a slightly vague language is so that they can avoid lawsuits in the future of somebody trying to argue that this answer choice is actually not the only one that strengthens it. They can always say, well, this one strengthens it a little more. But they get pretty skilled at writing questions that this almost never happens. And if it does happen, please rest assured this question is not going to be used for scoring. It is going to be removed, but this almost never happens. So when you see an answer choice that strengthens the argument in a strengthened question, you can confidently choose it and move on. If there's another one that also strengthens it, that is a faulty question. It will not be used for scoring. And if there isn't, then you are done anyway. So you can stop at C, save some time, don't get yourself more confused with answer choices D and E, and you're done in less than a minute. You can, believe it or not, enjoy logical reasoning questions as well. Now, learning how to deal with questions is definitely not something that comes naturally to most people just because you naturally have not taken the LSAT before. For most of you, it's the first time in your life. And that is why preparing is going to take some effort. And also, let me give you a little bit of a preview. Studying at the law school is not going to be easy. It is going to be hard. And the LSAT is also going to be hard. It is a competitive exam. Some of the people were asking, well, how is the in-home exam, LSAT-Flex, going to be comparable with the in-person exam, the regular LSAT, even though it's exam that's just half of the length of that exam? That exam is 5 sections, this one's only 3. So how is it possible they're going to be comparable? Well, the reason why it's going to be possible is because you are just simply going to be bell curved. So who cares if the exam is not exactly the same? You are going to be bell curved for the exam to be of the same scale. So your score is going to be determined purely based on how many people actually get the same score, or above or below. The percentile scores are going to stay, and the 120 to 180 scores are also going to stay. It's just the raw scores that are going to be changed. So even though there are fewer questions, you still gotta beat exactly the same number of people to get that score. And it is going to be hard. But what you could do, though, is you can retrain yourself to think differently. You gotta start thinking not as your maybe undergraduate student who were studying history or biology and reading books. You really got to start thinking as a future lawyer. And one of the ways that you can really tune in your brain to think the proper way about the LSAT is, if I am going to get a score of 164 or above, which is a top 1%, top 10%, what am I going to do differently from the other 90% of people? Everybody wants a score of 164 or 165 or above, but only 10% of people get that score. So what do they do? How are they actually achieving that score? Everybody has access to exactly the same books. They're all available on Amazon. And it is not an exam of being smart. So what do they do? And that's the question that you're going to ask yourself, right? And I want to give you a little bit of a preview of what do some of these people do and what kind of training do they receive. The program that we offer here is Admit Master is specifically designed for people who want to get scores of 165 and above. It is a program that's more in depth than almost any other program you're going to find on the market. Now, we offer in-person classes throughout the year. However, right now, our classes are available in online format only. We do certainly hope to be able to, again, offer our in-person classes. We have 2 locations in Toronto, one in Midtown at Yonge and 401, and one in our downtown location in Bloor and approximately Bloor and Avenue Road by University of Toronto. We are hoping at least one of these locations. We are in office buildings. Right now, both of these buildings are closed. When we reopen, whichever location opens first, we are going to offer our classes there at that location. Both are very close to subway stations. One is close to St. George subway station. Another one is very close to Lawrence subway station. However, what we're going to do in the meantime is we're going to let you start our classes online, and then we're going to let you jump back into the in-person class at no extra cost. And the online program is less expensive than the in-person program. It's about $200 less. So it's $11.99 Canadian, which is about approximately $800 US. And with this program, you're going to get access to all of our classes online. We're going to ship you the books to your home, and you're going to have access to both the paper resources and the online resources. And you're going to be able to come back to our class for free until December next year. So even if you're planning well ahead of time, 18 months ahead of time, you are going to be able to take advantage of our in-person offerings as well. What's really great about our classes is that you have access to 3 private tutoring sessions all throughout your studies. They're small classes. They're usually about 10 to 15 people. And in addition to that, you are going to be able to take advantage of some private tutoring. That is a service that if you look at the prices of different courses, you would notice most of them are around the same range, but other courses do not offer private tutoring included. And when you are trying to add this private tutoring that most people end up using, you would quickly see a few extra $100 added up. You will need some additional help when you get stuck. So we've already built it into our program. Now, we do give you a lot of resources to practice, so you're not going to have shortage of practice resources as well. Here's a couple of things about how the classes compare. The majority of the LSAT classes are fairly large in size. Our classes are intentionally kept small. We do not hire novice instructors. So all of our instructors have many, many years of experience. Right now, our instructor who is teaching a class, teaching the in-person class here in Toronto, he has 19 years of experience teaching the LSAT. You can only imagine how much experience you would gain in 19 years. I know that that some of you are younger than 19 years, perhaps. So this person has been teaching for 19 years. We do include the online course as well as the in-person course. So you're going to get both for the same fee. You are going to be able to refer back to your online course at any point in time. The classes are very interactive. The online classes are as well. You are actually going to be doing exercises. That's the only way that you can take this class. You're going to be learning the concepts. You're going to see different explanations, different skills. You'll get to try yourself. Most of the classes and most of the books are very content-based. We do include coaching outside of a class. The majority of the other outfits, the price per hour can run up to $300 an hour at some of the US-based companies. You are welcome to repeat our course for free within now until 2021, the end of 2021. We've extended this retake period. We do include the books, so do most of the other companies as well. And we also provide application support. So as part of your 3 coaching hours, you can use some of these hours to help you with your personal statements and so on. So what the majority of our students will do is they will use maybe half of these hours for LSAT and half for application, or maybe they'll use just an hour for application. And really they can sit down with the instructor and review some of your application documents and get some really valuable feedback. Again, our instructors have been around the block for many, many years. so they can give you feedback, not just on the LSAT, but also on the application. So the fee right now for our program is $11.99 Canadian, and we do have a guarantee that we are going to continue working with you until you are done. So if it takes you 2 months, that is great. If it takes you 18 months to really get that 165 plus, we are absolutely going to be here. We are a medium-sized company. Our company has been around for 22 years. We are from Toronto originally. However, we offer classes all across North America, in-person classes and certainly online classes right now. So our company was founded in 1998. I know that's certainly probably earlier than most of you were born. And ultimately, we do want you to walk away with not just the high LSAT score, but also with some of the amazing skills that are going to help you think like a lawyer. So the skills you are going to learn while studying for the LSAT are going to make your law school so much more enjoyable. If you can talk to people who barely made it to the law schools with a LSAT score below average and people who actually scored very highly, when you speak with them about their experience in the law school, you would hear very different stories. People who got high LSAT scores, they tend to do really well in school and they tend to enjoy the process a lot better. And the reason why is not that they're smarter in some way, but they've really acquired these skills through studying for the LSAT that are going to be really relevant to your law degree, a law program. So is it possible to do this completely yourself? It is possible, and some people do that, but the question is it really worth it? It is probably going to take a considerable amount of time and frustration, and we do actually want some people to study themselves, because when you come to our class and when you really want to score 165, well, if we have 15 people in class or 10 people in class, we do really want everybody to score 165. However, it is not possible for everybody to score 165. It is a bell curved exam. 165 is the top 10%. So we need the rest of the 90% of people to not do well. And that's what the story that you're going to see on every LSAT exam. So that is why we absolutely want some people to study with books and study themselves and not do well, because that's the only way for people who do things differently to do well. So when you're deciding what am I going to do, how am I going to study, really think about this from this perspective. Where do you see yourself on that scale? And what kind of decisions are you going to make to really be on that scale? And that's a decision you can make. The LSAT score is not something that's awarded to you. It is not something that's given to you as a gift. It's a reward for making the right decisions and for putting in the right amount of effort. So if you decide that you want a certain score and you chart your way to get in there, you can absolutely be there for sure, 100%. Now, if you don't believe you can be there, then I would actually like to invite you to connect with us. You can go on our website, admitmaster.com, book your consultation. I would love to chat, regardless of whether you end up taking our program or not. We offer this as a free service because you've come here. And we're going to help you understand, is the law career right for you? If that's still the decision you're trying to make, we're going to help you understand the timelines, all kinds of different components of the law school application. We talked about them just really briefly today. And also, we're going to help you build a solid LSAT plan. If you cannot come to our program for various reasons, you can use that plan to prepare. It's certainly going to be valuable. If you can come to our program, it is going to become a part of your journey with us. So the last thing I want to leave you with is that you absolutely can do well on your first attempt of the LSAT. Many of our clients would. Some of them would take the LSAT twice. The test they experience is fairly stressful. Right now, it's probably going to be slightly less stressful. It is a shorter exam that you take at home. So I'd like to invite you to take an opportunity and really take this exam at home, because there is potentially a greater chance that you can do well. It is still going to be an exam that follows the same types of questions, the same structure. You can still take notes. You can still use the same resources. It's just a shorter exam. So I think this is an amazing opportunity. And as sad and unfortunate is the situation, the lockdown situation that we are in right now, in order for us to protect the health and well-being of people around us and our own, this is really a great opportunity for us to invest some time into preparing for the LSAT and really take that LSAT-Flex in June and use that score. That score is going to be used at par at the law schools. They're not going to discount that score in any way. They do understand that they need to make some adjustments. So you absolutely can use this score for any application in the next 5 years. So why not take this advantage of this opportunity? In my opinion, and I've been in this industry now for over 11 years, there was not a better time to study for the LSAT. There was not a better time to do your LSAT exam. So ladies and gentlemen, this is all that I wanted to cover. If you have any questions, then please put them in a chat box and please put them in a Q&A box. I am going to take your questions now for the next couple of minutes, or we can stay longer if we need to. If you do not have any questions, if everything is really clear to you, then what I would like to suggest is that you go on our website and really connect with us. We are going to follow up with you by email and really invite you to follow up with us and take advantage of that free consultation. And if you are getting already very close to writing your test, I know some of you perhaps were scheduled for the April exam, and the exam is coming up in May. So I'd like to wish you the best of luck, and please stay in touch just in case things do not go well, and absolutely stay in touch and we can help you out. But I hope that things do go well and you're going to be well on your way of getting into your dream law school. So thanks again for joining us tonight. If you have any questions, let me know. If not, we're going to close the meeting right now. All right. As I see no questions, again, okay, somebody asked a question. Do you coordinate study groups? Yes, absolutely, we do. All of the students who are studying with us, we would encourage you to be in a study group. We would coordinate this. We do have a way to connect all of our students together. So we do have a Facebook group where you're going to be able to connect with people who are studying at the same time. We also, even though you are studying online, we have a few people who are starting around the same time. So absolutely, we will connect you and we will organize some study groups. Some of them are going to be moderated. So what this means is the first couple of times you're going to have an instructor joining you, and you are going to have support. And sometimes the instructor can certainly join you if necessary in some of these study groups. Do we offer payment plans? Yes, we do offer payment plans. So typically we offer to split the payment for the class in 2 or 3 payments. That is absolutely something that we can discuss on a more individual basis. That would depend on your own circumstances as well as on your own timeline. Now we do, the payment plan will also determine your access to classes. Because we do give you access to all of the classes. So if, for example, you have a certain payment plan, then you would not have access to all of the classes all at once. Right? So that's how it typically works. With the classroom schedule, of course, it works the same way. But absolutely, if you would like to talk about your own personal situation and what would work for you, please let's connect and we'll figure things out. But yeah, you can absolutely get started with a smaller payment. All right, now that I don't see any other questions. Perfect. So again, just to reiterate, we do have several LSAT instructors. All of them are very experienced. They all have been teaching for a while. So when you work with an instructor one-on-one, it could be an instructor that is teaching our class at the same time. So for example, when you come back to our in-person class, then we know that we have an instructor who's going to be teaching the next in-person class. So we can certainly get you to work with that instructor. And if you prefer, you can work with other instructors as well. All of our instructors have been teaching classes at some point. We have 3 or 4 LSAT instructors who are all super qualified. By the way, the minimum score for our instructors to be able to teach our class is 170. So it's not 165, it's 170. So somebody who must have scored at least a 170. We have instructor who scored as high as in the 176, 178 range. And the majority of them scored in the kind of 171 to 175 range. Okay, perfect. So I know there are a couple of questions here as well that are a little more individual. So I'm going to address these questions with you by email. And certainly, Zed, if you could please just type your name so that we are able to connect with you. You just have initials. So if we know your full name, then we're going to be able to connect with you. And yes, we can absolutely provide what you've just requested. So if you can please put your name and your contact information, then absolutely we can send that to you. Okay, perfect. Excellent. Thank you. So I will follow up with you by email with any of the questions. And if you have any questions in the future, please feel free to respond back to me by email. I will be happy to continue this conversation. And again, whenever you're ready to join us, we can absolutely help you. And if it's going to be a longer journey, that's absolutely okay. And if at the end you realize that this is not the right fit for you, then that's absolutely fine as well. Okay, perfect. So again, thanks for joining us. And I look forward to seeing you shortly. I will be in touch. We do offer some additional events and some different seminars. So I certainly will be in touch when we do have some other events and seminars and classes scheduled. Take care and all the best.